Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
ready?
dude.
3, 2, 1. Okay, awesome. Hey,
Hey,
well,
so it's me, Juan. People from Mexico should recognize me for my pretty bad memes.
yeah, and it's me, Marcus. Basically the guy that makes these uh, powerful posts, or I like to think they're powerful, and gets a lot of people to look at them, and I start a lot of arguments that might be seen as divisive.
Start a lot of arguing, man. A lot of arguing.
Yeah,
Last post they wanted to cancel you, say the admin shouldn't allow you to continue to post what you're posting. So
yeah, yeah. So here I am. Here we both are. Um, Juan, how are things going?
going good, man. Just been reading some more books and about this whole mestizo stuff. Like, there's always a lot of research to be done because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So that's what I wanted us to get into, was this whole concept of mestizaje. And I see there's a lot of supporters for it still, even on Mexica, which is surprising because considering this is an indigenous group. Like, I know some members have said that, oh no, Mexica is just a Mexican group. Well, that's not the case. Look at the description. It says it's an indigenous group. Uh, it's about embracing your indigenous roots. It's saying that it's a tribe for the tribeless. That's not the language of a national group. That's the language of an indigenous group. So
That's right. Yeah, man, for me, like, it's really great that there's so many groups out there. And that's why I wanted to join, because I always had this voice of, wanting, natives to stand up to, the political problems that, we face, and not just like us with the crisis that is going on with like our identity, but, with tribes as well. Just giving more power to them, in some way. And I think by us not having these hypocritical thoughts, as far as like, because of our skin color or where we come from, um, and looking at each other as equal. And I think that these groups can really help that, as we can have, constructive, peaceful dialogue, maybe sometimes not so peaceful. um,
yeah,
and that's why, that we started this podcast here, so we can go over this, a few things here together, and we can get deep down into it and figure out what can be done.
right, exactly. So, well, another reason, I mean, that's good for this podcast is not everybody can take the time to read all these books or just do all this research. So, I mean, this is a really easy format for people to just learn about all these different things that we have to talk about. So mestizaje, the first thing I want to touch on is the Spanish caste system. It was made pretty soon after the conquest. You had mixed people, right? Because the Spaniards didn't have a lot of women that they brought from Spain. It wasn't like when the British came to the Americas that they had a lot of settlers. That wasn't the case with Spain. They had some, but not as many. And when they first mixed with the native women, the children would be called uh, well, they weren't even called anything at first. At first, most of the time they were considered just white. They would be brought up as white despite the racial mix. If the Spanish father considered them legitimate, if the Spanish father did not recognize the child, it would be sent to an indigenous community and basically live in like a fully blooded indigenous person. So there was no distinction at the beginning until the Spaniards made that distinction. So
Exactly. And that's the problem, I think, in the beginning, was creating this racial classification system. Um, having these half native, half Spanish, people, um, and then being taught by Spaniards to believe that indigenous people are somewhat, inferior to them, um, which, breaks it down to today, I think, which, shows very stark, comparisons of, the colonial mentality of the 1500s, to now. It still lives on, and I think that his name was, I'm sorry again, his name was the poet, the they start with the J. Juan. Do you remember his
oh,
name?
I think it was Gonzalez, and then he wrote that poem "I Am Joaquin." Yeah,
Yeah, Joaquin. Yeah, his
yeah,
name. Thanks about that. Just showing the identity crisis that I think a lot of, um, people that identify as mestizo kind of just floss over, um, because we look at ourselves as like being composed of like half Spanish and half native blood, which is not the case a lot of the time. A lot of us, I think, are more native than what we really think we are. Um,
Right.
and that creates this sort of I'm mestizo, I'm better than you sort of problem that goes on today. Um, so I
Right.
think this.
Well, I was going to touch on that, like the whole, like how it still has power today, like with Yalitza Aparicio when she got famous because of her performance in Roma. You
Mhm.
had people that were casting hate at her, not only like the white people in Mexico, but a lot of the mestizos or whatever were casting hate on her and calling her a dirty India and all this other. And it's like, why, bro? You're like you're basically the same thing as her, and that's what I found most mind-boggling. It's like you're not some separate identity. No matter how much you try, you're an Indio yourself or an India yourself. So like, why are you insulting that person?
Mhm. Oh yeah, yeah, and it's the same system that was installed in our minds from the 1500s, from 1492 and so on. Um, the problem with that is that this mainstream, this media that goes through Latin America is held by the strings of like European appearing, Krillos, and they are the ones that set the rules. And I
Yeah.
think that those rules are then followed by people that identify as this like mixed race, again feeling that they're higher up or higher, further above than native people. So these insults, these racial derogatory terms, for example, from with Yalitza, it's sad to see, but this is what happens when you have a racist system.
Right.
That goes
Exactly. And
into effect.
yeah, and then the whole I've noticed this too. Not so I've noticed this some in my own personal life, but a lot of people talk about this where whiteness is exalted. So if you have lighter skin, it's like, oh wow, she looks pretty Española, or like, whereas if somebody calls you prieto, which just means like you're pretty dark, that's considered an insult. Like people get offended, or they call them an indio, and they get offended because apparently that means uneducated. That means like dirty. It means like kind of like a savage. And it's like, why is that the case? That's what we are. So why is being dark skinned? Why is being indio a negative thing? That's a
Hmm.
problem. That's the self hatred problem. So.
Hmm. And it's taught down, I think, from parents to grandparents because they live in a system where having lighter skin is seen as good. And having darker skin, you're seen as not as attractive. You could be poor, um, and all these, terrible things. And it's just a system that I think is not suited, especially for a native majority country, because again, it just creates division, divisiveness amongst one another, and that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing people that are native but identifies as mestizo identity, and they're insulting their own brothers and sisters. it's
Right.
it's sad.
Oh, and let's get into that whole native majority thing. So I saw a member in a previous post said, like, give the statistics from the Mexican government and say, well, the Mexican government says that the majority of the population, like 60%, is mestizo. So therefore, so why would we argue against that? As like, because the process they go by that is extremely flawed. So to be indigenous in Mexico, and this also comes from another indigenous person named Alejandro Martinez that I've spoken with, you have to be you need to know an indigenous language, I believe, and you also need to live. You certainly need to live in an indigenous community. And if you leave that indigenous community, if you somehow advance past the traditional lifestyle, if you go to college, let's say you move to the city, you stop being indigenous. And it's like, how does that make any sense? Like indigenous or Native American Indian is a race. You can't just stop being a race because you suddenly evolve a little bit or become modern. Like, so it's like, it's really racist too, because it's saying, oh well, they have to stay like that, they have to stay poor, they have to stay traditional, they
Hmm.
can't they can't be better themselves, otherwise they're a mestizo now. They're not, they can't be indigenous, that's impossible. Like, that's extremely racist, and that's nonsense. Like, nobody else thinks like that in America. Like, black people, if they go to college, don't somehow stop being black. Like, it's silly.
Exactly. And that's the problem, I think, in throughout all of Latin America, is to be indigenous, you have to be considered primitive, almost
Right.
caveman like. Um, you have to look like, you run on, government funding, being poor. And then once you acclimate into an urban society, you are no longer seen as such. And I think that's the problem, with when the independence came of Latin American countries, we thought that everything would be okay. When in reality, that was not the case. The Criollos that won these wars against, Spaniards, set the rules from that point on, and it wasn't
Right.
exactly in natives' favor. Um, and we're seeing those effects today, unfortunately.
Right.
And it's a
And then,
sorry.
oh, my bad. I just wanted to throw in this point as far as like the assimilation, because I see a lot of people, they're like, well, assimilation, like it's a positive thing. Like, no one acknowledges how a lot of that assimilation was forced. And I have a source here. It was written by the professor Jack Forbes, who was of Powhatan descent himself, registered American Indian here in the North. Fortunately, he passed away in 2011. But he wrote an article called "The Use of Racial and Ethnic Terms in America: Management by Manipulation." And in that article, it quotes, "In 1563, the Spanish crown prohibited mestizos from living in indigenous communities, only making an exception for those actually born in the community." So as you can see, these are segregationist policies that would prevent people from retaining that indigenous identity or heritage. So this whole concept of like, well, we're no longer that because of assimilation, because it was this beautiful thing and it created this new thing. That's not true. That's not how the history went. So I just want to make that point too.
You're right. And, another great man that also, said something similar was Russell Means, and he died actually the year after, Professor Forbes. And he just talked about like the how borders, pretty much crossed us. We didn't
Right.
cross them, and it shows. We literally have countries named after, Spanish people, such as Bolivia and Colombia. Well, Columbus was Italian, but represented the Spanish Armada. And we barely have any native countries under native names. Maybe, I guess Mexico, but look at everywhere
Mexico, I guess,
else.
would be the same thing, right? Yeah, I guess Mexico would be the closest example because of Mexica and then Mexico. So,
Hmm.
but that, I think that's the only one that comes to mind.
Peru kind of was too, actually.
Peru.
Yeah, the conquistadors were trying to figure out the name, like what to name this country. And I guess they called it Baru, but then from whatever Incan they had asked, he had called it Peru. So then there was kind of like some different wording as the years
Right.
went on. They got it to become called Peru. Other than that, yeah, Bolivia, Ecuador, um, Panama, Guatemala, El Salvador, obviously, Nicaragua are all Spanish words.
Yeah.
Uh, but the Mestizaje culture, um, I wanted to get onto that really quick.
All
But
right.
before we did, I think that there's, thanks to these groups, I think more people are opening their eyes up and seeing that this identity could be seen as um, almost in some ways like erasing a part of the native um, blood that we have and embracing a culture that might not, truly represent us. As the Spaniards' plan was to erase native identity, creating this caste system. Natives had no racial classification system. This is all brought on by Spain,
Right.
and the Criollos that are here now, and you see that this system continues to be pushed in Latin America through the media. Um, I don't have that much knowledge on the education system, but I am somewhat certain that natives, at least tribal members, are seen as someone that is poor. And again, as we said, um, once I acclimate into an urban society or somewhere, they're no longer seen as that. Um, so I think the Latin American thinking process is that darker skinned people are seen as somewhat inferior, which is sad.
Right.
But as I said before, I think we're all waking up and seeing that that is not the case. Um, and I think with more critical thought, um, this will be brought to light more, and things will look up from here.
That is the hope, man. That is the hope.
Yeah.
Just to let people know. Well, one other little aside is for a lot of people that like the mestizo term. My source is a translator that lives down in Mexico City. He grew up there and translates a lot of my published articles. Mestizo literally means half breed, like as in the dog. You know, you're a half breed. So to say you're mestizo with pride, you're basically insulting yourself. I wouldn't want to be called that, but you know, because the words in Spanish for mixed are really mezclado or mixto. You can already tell with mixto, it obviously means mixed. It's the same thing, right? Mezclado is basically the same thing as just, yeah. But like mestizo, it's a half breed label, like you're an animal. So I'm seeing
Hmm.
how that's a positive thing.
Yeah, and just to be clear on that, like for me, I was adopted. I lived in the U.S. for most of my life, and if I hadn't have been adopted and would have survived the sicknesses that I had bestowed on me, um, I was born in Lima, so I'm quite certain that I would have also been thrown into this mestizo category, erasing my racial thought of being native at all. And that is the same case for millions of other natives in Peru as well. Look at the demographics of Peru, of Bolivia, Ecuador. You have a significant native population, but you also have a mestizo um, population in the big cities, Lima, um, and La Paz in Bolivia. And in, there's also, it's hard to pronounce the name of the capital in Ecuador, but the population is very much mestizo. You go to the city, I was in Lima, most of the people looked very much like me,
Right.
and I identify myself as native. But you see that the mestizo population is very high because natives like me are either acclimated into this society without thinking that maybe we are native, or they willingly go into this because of the colonial system that we live in. Um, so I do think that the mestizo identity is meant for us to break away from our native roots, um, and thus gives us this thinking that anything below us, for example, natives, are seen as something as lesser being, um, when that obviously shouldn't be the case.
Right. Right. Certainly. One thing I've learned, because I read this book called Before Mestizaje, I got it right here. So in this book, it talks about how the Krillos, they had to, as the world was more like modernizing, and like science came to be more popular. A lot of the scientists in Europe would also say that the Krillos themselves were inferior, even though they were white, because to live in the new world. So it had something to do with the air. It was something stupid like, oh, you're inferior because it poisons the mind, or something really silly and retarded, or silly. But they said all this. So the Krillos started defending themselves, and one of their arguments was, well, natives are not genetically inferior, and this is how they changed their tune in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They're not genetically inferior, but they're culturally inferior. So that only supports your statement there that it's mestizo thing is meant to break like the back of our cultural identity as indigenous people. That's it's complete. It's meant for the erasure, because they even said themselves, well, indigenous culture is inferior. So you have it right there.
It was meant to brainwash us. And I think that was the most long lasting impact on us up to this point today. They succeeded in doing this, but that doesn't mean that it can, people say, get over it. That's how it's going to go. But I think people tend to forget that we are the majority in Guatemala, Paraguay, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador. I could keep on going, Mexico, Nicaragua. And we have the power to, break this sort of colonial thinking. But it does take time. And once that colonial thought is broken, I think we can better, regain our knowledge of our Native identity, and thus start on the healing process and helping our, Native tribal brothers and sisters who are suffering under this colonial system.
I think a good step would be, before we can even tackle a lot of these countries and try to change the way a lot of the citizens see themselves, is to have a united front here in the United States with a lot of us that are, Latinos or Hispanics, and
Mm-hmm.
we can rebrand ourselves as Indigenous, as natives. Then we can really have an impact. But I would say the first foothold would be changing how we're seeing here in the United States, and then from there pushing all the way down south,
Mm-hmm.
and in a metaphorical sense, I guess, reconquering everything.
Yes, and knowing that we are not on a pedestal above Native tribes, we are, the same as them, so we should not look at them, differently.
Right. In my
There's
in my
some,
opinion, native tribes should be like exalted. They should be admired because they've preserved what has been largely lost by almost everybody. Like, they need to be protected. There should be laws protected. There should be truth protecting them. Like, that's how it should be treated. They
oh,
shouldn't be seen. They shouldn't be seen as inferior. That's nonsense. So,
yeah, you're right. Since the beginning, since Europeans got here, they have gone through the shredder, and we see it today, through the disappearance of, lost women of the First Nations, in Canada, in the U.S. We have the ignorance of governments not coming to the need of natives, in Central America, in South America, um, and just straight racism. And I think if we can't see that the system is not for natives now, we won't see it in the future. Like, the time has to be now to wake up, or else it's just going to get worse from here on.
exactly, exactly. I think another 2 points I want to throw in for the mestizo thing, because I already could hear the arguments, because I swear it always comes back to these same arguments we hear again and again. I'll mock them right here, but they're as follows. Are you 100%? Are you Raza Pura? Did you grow up in an indigenous community? What's your tribe? Like, I swear, those are the four. It always cycles between those four, man. It's
Yeah.
cycle. It's a repeating cycle of these four questions. Like, I bet you if you answered yes to all these, like, they would still find some fifth thing to ask you. Like, okay, so you have a tribe, you did grow up in an indigenous community, you are pure race, and you're 100%. Well, do you speak an indigenous language? Do you practice indigenous? I swear to God, it would just continue. That you can't please a lot of these people.
Mm-hmm.
But my only points is, no other racial group is treated with this level of ridiculousness, of this level of scrutiny. You take Black people in the U.S. I don't know if a lot of people, I always point this out because a lot of people I don't think realize this. Black people in the U.S. are on average 23, 24% white, almost a quarter white. And they are not called mulattoes. They are not called mestizo. They're not called mixed. They are called Black people. Okay. And I mean, they don't know what African tribe they came from. They didn't grow up in an African community. They don't speak an African language. They don't look 100% African, and yet they're still called Black or African. So what's the problem? Like, why is there these stupid double standards? It makes no sense. You take somebody that's half Asian, a lot of people will still see him as Asian. Like, it's the same thing. Like, it's completely ridiculous to say you have to be 100%. Like, hardly anyone is 100% anything. It's freaking nonsense. That's a racial purist like standpoint. It's a very Eurocentric standpoint, and it's a very like kind of like eugenics type of standpoint. Like, oh well, if you're not that, then you're erased. Like, you can't be this race. You're some other identity. You're just trying to cleanse like all these people from being able to say that they're indigenous. You're trying to take that away from them, and that's like very messed up, in my opinion.
It is. And you're right. In Asia and Africa, there's so many African Americans who have at least somewhat a significant portion of like white blood, but they're not seen
Right.
as mixed. Like you said, 20%, 30%, but they're still seen as Black by a majority of whites. Are still seen as Black. I mean, we look at President Barack Obama. He's seen as the first Black president. We look at
Right.
Tiger Woods. He's seen as the first, Black African American golfer, even though he's half. Um,
Right, Kamala Harris, more recently,
Kamala
vice
Harris.
president, right? Black, first female black VP, right? They didn't
Hmm.
call her, first mulata
Yeah,
VP.
yeah,
they,
exactly.
they they said black. They didn't say
Yeah.
mixed. Any of this nonsense, like
So our Spanish, should we hold Spanish to some, again, some sort of high pedestal that they should be included in our admixture of us being native and then having like 20%, 10% Spanish blood, or even 30% or more? I mean, we're native, we're in our native country. So do we need to identify with being mixed when you don't see other groups doing this as well? Again,
right,
it's the
exactly.
colonial thought process that we unknowingly are still bringing on into the 21st century. Um, and it's silly, in my opinion.
It's
I,
completely silly. As far as Mexico, I know in Mexico the caste system ended in 1821, and I think it was like a couple years before that where Mexico was independent from Spain. So, but yet it's like anybody that still acts with this whole mestizo thing, it's like, dude, this has been destroyed for the last almost 200 years. We're not from Spain anymore. We declared independent. Like the way a lot of these people act with, and they cling so much to the Spanish blood, this whole mestizo. It's like, dude, like you're acting like you're still ruled over by Spain or something. Like it's silly. And then also, in addition to the black thing, almost all, not all, but a lot of American Indians here in the continental U.S. are mixed race. Like a lot of them are not pure blooded. There are some. I know the Apaches. A lot of them are very pure blooded, but like the Cherokees, not really. A lot of these tribes have as low as 7% native blood requirements. Some have 25%. Some have 50. A lot of us have way more than that. Certainly more than the 7% of the or the 25. So it's like, and yet they're called American Indians here in the U.S. And before you start attacking me saying, "Oh well, they're sovereign nation, so it's like an ethnic identity," no, it's not, because the U.S. government considers them a different race. Okay, so you can't cop out and use your little double standards. They are considered a different race with just that little amount of blood. So why is it that we have to be 100%? That's freaking stupid.
it is. And I ask people, like, Google Wes Welker, a Caucasian, native, well, not Caucasian to his point of view, but a Native American football player that played for the New England Patriots. He is part of a reservation in the United States, and he is probably about 70 or 80, or maybe 90% white, but he's a part of a reservation in the United States. I don't remember the name of the tribe. I think it's somewhere in Oklahoma. And yet you have us here who don't identify as native, but we look much darker than our brothers and sisters in Canada and in the United States.
Right.
Like, it's silly. Like, what makes the Spanish so special, or why do we think the Spanish are so special that we need to include them in this identity that just that does not help our cause in
Right.
creating racial harmony?
Right, exactly. And like exactly, you hit the nail on the head with that. I just don't understand why people defend the Spanish part so bad. And like their go-to is like, well, then you hate a part of yourself. You have to accept all of yourself. Like, where does this idea come from that you have to accept everything? Like no other racial group really does this. Like black people, like again, on average, almost a quarter white. Do people say, "Oh, you guys hate yourselves. You don't accept who you are"? Like, no, no one says any of that. Well, first of all, you probably get punched in the face. Second of all, no one actually says this shit to them. So it's like, why do you feel the need to tell me, oh, well, you need to embrace the Spanish roots? Why do I need to embrace? What's to be proud of with the Spain? I need to be proud of the rape, the conquest, instilling a white supremacist system that has made me hate the color of my skin growing up. Like, well, also that was impacted by the fact that I grew up in Alabama, but you know what I mean? Like these countries in Mexico, like it is seen as a negative thing to be prieto or to be dark skinned. Like look at Yalitza Aparicio, like we mentioned before. So it's like, what exactly is there to be proud of with the Spanish part? I can't think of a single thing to be proud of with it. And you go to Spain, they're not going to welcome you like some long lost brother. They're going to see you as some dirty brown savage. So
Pretty much. And it's it's all over Latin America, this thinking style. And it's just, I think that we've lived through this colonial system long enough, and it does eventually have to be rejected by a majority of us because it creates separation and isolation from, you know, our brothers and sisters. And again, remember, like the border crossed us.
Right.
Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, all of us, we were all one, you know, at one time. You know, there's tribes, but we're all here on the same continent. No, no one asked to be Bolivian or Colombian. You know, these nations were drawn up by, you know, the Spanish. Um, and again, the Spanish did some pretty messed up shit. You
Yeah.
know, the genocide, the disease, the slavery, um, so many, you know, terrible things. So I don't think that we should make these considerations to make them so special, to brag about that, oh, over 20%, or you're going to hate the other side of yourself. Because again, I think many people make this mistake that everyone in Mexico is half Spanish, half native. And that is not the case. Mexico is a native country. Um, there are millions of people in the southern part of Mexico, um, in the Yucatan area, as well as starts with an O, Oaxaca,
Oh, Oaxaca.
Oaxaca, yeah,
Yeah, that
you
state.
know,
Yeah.
and the Mexico City. Um, so we're not all half native, half
Right.
something else. Um, I
Right.
think,
I narrowly missed the mark. I'm 50% native. I'm like, depending on the DNA test, if you average them all, I'm 51% native, like 43% European. But like, in my opinion, this is also going out to a lot of people that might be self-conscious. Even if you have slightly higher European, you still look brown. You still look native. You're still not treated like a Spaniard. You're not treated like you're white. You're not seen like that. So for you to still act like that, you're not doing yourself any favors. You should reclaim your indigenous identity, even if you
mhm,
are less indigenous than Spaniard. It makes no difference.
exactly. Because
That's
here's
my
the
2 cents.
thing: the people in Spain don't care. It's the people in your country, in Mexico, Peru, Bolivia, the small little minority, and however many followers they might have that care, that want the system in place. To think that you're some special mixed identity, they want that native part of you gone. That's been the process through these past 5 centuries.
Right.
Um,
Uh, in that book, actually, like the before Mestizaje thing, there's a quote in there that said that Indios could be cleansed in as little as 3 generations of just mixing with whites. They have that in
mhm.
there. Like, a lot of this stuff was planned. Uh, just the whole concept of like, yeah, you can cleanse, you can salvage, redeeming qualities from these like Black and Indian races. And it's like, why is that even a thing? Salvage what? Redeem what? There's no need to salvage or redeem anything.
It's
So,
still the plan. It still is.
so
Like, look at the Caribbean islands, look at Cuba, look at the Dominican Republic. You won't find many native actors and actresses. It's through ethnic cleansing as to why Cuba is the way it is today. Same with Dominican Republic. Same with Puerto Rico. Look at Mexico. Look at the Central and South American countries. You won't find many native actors and actresses. They're on the same path. And it starts with the elimination of native identity and their attack on native tribes. You have in Peru, where I was from, mass sterilizations that were going on in the 1990s. Again, it was to eliminate native tribes. You can look that up. I'm not kidding. Um, and that's not just in Peru. It's in other countries as well, even through more destructive methods. Um, and I'm not saying this as some sort of like, chicken that's like saying the sky is falling. This shit is really happening. Um, and it is going through Central America, through South America. Um, even look at the United States at one time, in California. The government thought that there were too many people of color, so they started mass sterilizations. Um, so we have to break away from this Eurocentric identity if we want to, save our brothers and sisters that are suffering, um, in turn save ourselves. Because right now, the way things are going, it's not helping anything.
Beautiful way to put it there, man.
Thank you.
Hit everything on the nail. Hit everything on the nail. One thing I wanted to touch on is this Hispanic and Latino, these terms, right? So Hispanic and Latino. I grew up, I admire, even though I've reclaimed my indigenous identity, I still admire a lot of the empires that the Europeans had, like, Rome and all that were pretty cool. Well, Latino kind of, it reminded me back in the day when I was growing up, oh, like Latino, like in Latin, like the Roman Empire, right? They're really cool. They're really legit, right? You talk about Hispanic, you think about Spain. Oh, the conquistadors that came over, they're so gallant. That's how, like, they make it seem in history class, right? So gallant, so brave, so badass. And yet people don't treat you like you're tied to Rome. They don't treat you like you're tied to Spain. They don't see me as some badass conquistador Roman like blend or something like cool like that. That's not how it's treated in Alabama. You know what they saw? They didn't see the freaking Colosseum, and they didn't see the conquistador helmet. They saw the brown skin. So why we call ourselves these two terms is beyond me. It acts too like our history started when these countries discovered us. That like oh, that was a start. We didn't exist before that because we're Hispanic. That's our origin. It's complete nonsense. Like, we were here thousands of years before. So it's an insult, quite frankly, to even have these terms that tie you to these European countries that have nothing to do with you at all.
It's true. Adding on to those terms, even in American media outlets, and this is left or right, it doesn't matter. We are thrown into this, Latino, Latinx identity, regardless of if we like it or not. Again, that also has to stop. I saw the native girl that had, slapped that woman in Arizona for, telling her to go back to Mexico. We have media outlets calling her a Latina when she herself said that she was native. So again, remember that we have people sorry.
Oh, I think I read in the comments, somebody said that this, Latina, right, that she was a registered American Indian with the federal government in a tribe near there. So that's even, like, if the media actually even did their freaking homework, like, for once, they would know that. Why are you still calling her Latina? Right. But see, here's the thing. That's just proof that we're all the same people. If she is she's a registered American Indian here, she looks the same as we do. I mean, we're all the same race. It's there. It's at the end of the day, that's there. Like, so, but yes, I agree. Like, the media, that it just contributes more to more confusion, more erasure. It's frustrating.
And one thing that I didn't think I put into consideration is, I mentioned this, that it is the big wigs that are, using these terms and pushing these terms more into our lives as Latino, Latina, but it brings them money, revenue. Like, look at our Latin American movies and everything. And they push those terms so it gets, our attention. Like, oh, I'm Latino, I'm Latina. Right. But when we see these movies, it doesn't have our racial representation.
No, they all look like white Spaniards, to be honest. Yeah. A lot of these, like, I mean, you watch any, like I've seen a lot of the novellas. Like, I haven't watched them, right? But I'll see them when my parents are watching them, and a lot of these women, they just look like white women. I'm like, what in the world? like you go to Mexico, you're not gonna find a lot of these women.
Like, where are you finding these people from Europe?
Where are you finding them? Like what the heck? Like, where are these like white Spanish women at? Like, I don't see them. I see indigenous people. So it's like, why aren't there more indigenous people as the main actors? Like, so yeah, I mean, I think I saw like the models too for like I think it was like Miss Mexico, right? So you had a bunch of these models from different states, like Miss Coahuila and Miss this and Miss Oaxaca, right? And all these other things. Well, like, not throwing shade, but a lot of these women, like, they just look like white women. I'm like, I've been to Coahuila. I know a lot of these women do not look like that. Why is it a white woman on the cover? Like, not hating on it, because again, I'm not like racist, but I mean, they're still censoring like what the real population looks like. It don't look like that white woman. It looks like me or you. So what gives.
It's that colonial eliminate the native system that we have that's still in place to this day. Again, it's the Criollo bigwigs that are in charge of these things, contests in Latin America. So we see that we're brainwashed to believe that lighter skinned is more beautiful, and unfortunately, those are who represent a mostly native country. Look at Colombia. Look at Peru. When I was in Peru, I saw the Miss World was a Peruvian, and she was a woman who looked like she was from Spain, and I was hoping to finally see some native representation as
Right.
a young teenager, and that was not the case. And let me just be clear. I understand that there's many different ethnicities and races that live in Peru, in Lima. I mean, for the most part, but it is a native majority country. You look at the
Right.
past models, and women that were in this as these candidates in Peru, and you won't see many that are native, even though they are the native,
Right.
majority.
And think about this here in the United States, like the media loses their shit if like they're talking about more diversity, like in media, right? Why is there no black people in this cast, right? Why there's no Asian people, or that's great. I am 100% with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't see the same flip out for our country. So why is it all white people? Like, where's the flip out? Where the hell are we? Like, I'm not there. Like, you're not there. So what the hell? Like, most of the people there are our color, look like us. So why is it just white Spaniards?
Yeah, and
Like, that's
before
a
people
problem.
exactly, and before like people might be like, "Oh, you're just being racist or something." Please remember, ladies and gentlemen, this has been going on for centuries, decades, forever. So tell me when there's at least a century of Native women being represented in these
Right.
countries, and I'll stop complaining. But from what I'm seeing, doesn't look like it's happening. Yeah, you have
Right.
Yaritza, an actress. Okay, what she gets some the representation that she gets, and then the insults that come straight to her. So am I supposed to be like happy that one Native woman in Mexico is only getting all this glamour? Like, where are the other ones? There's plenty of beautiful women in Mexico that are Native that are there. But again, you have not just Krillos, but people like us that are brainwashed to believe that white is best. Again, the system that was put in place by Spanish and Krillos to this day still breathes.
Yeah, as I've heard, like I've heard this is a saying among a lot of white racists, like if it ain't white, it ain't right. That's
It
the
ain't what,
attitude.
yeah. I thought someone else said that too, a famous actor, but
Yeah.
I forgetting who that was.
I don't remember, but I mean,
Yeah.
it highlights the point, really. If it ain't white, it ain't right. So,
Oh, I thought it
yeah.
was who's that small African American actor who's always with The Rock?
Oh,
Uh,
freak! I forgot his name.
maybe it was him.
Yeah, it might have been him. Maybe it was sarcastic, but that's how they think. I mean, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
how they
I mean, it
think.
was funny though. Yeah, if it ain't white, it ain't right. That's always funny. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, the just the Hispanic Latino identity, ladies and gentlemen. Again, we're going to see this pushed more and more um, as the country becomes more diverse. You'll have Black identity being pushed more in movies, shows. You'll have Asian identity, which for some reason, when most Americans think Asian, they automatically think East Asian. Not many people think of the rest of the major ethnic groups in Asia, two being the South Asian area, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and then the entire Middle East. On another separate branch, currently the United States Census has Middle Easterners being identified as white. A majority of us do not look at them as being white.
They certainly don't look like they're white.
They do not. They are not Bob and Barb down the street.
Right.
Shall we
Like,
say? Um, And no, I don't know anyone that looks at them as being white Americans. I know they're pushing for their own MENA census box, hopefully for the 2030 census or around there. It was actually denied by one of President Trump's administrative employees who was in charge of the census. They said they didn't have enough information for Arabs to be considered not white. I don't believe that, but
yeah, I don't either.
for another story. But yeah, going back, yeah, Asians will be pushed, blacks will be pushed, but when Hispanics are pushed, watch who will be pushed into these roles of Hispanics. I think we're going to see that more whiter skinned people, there's a good chance that they will take the roles of Latin American films. Again, look what we see in Latin America. Look at the media,
Right.
and actors. Then again, I do think that having more non-white people in the U.S., like blacks and Asians, Polynesians, there will be maybe a more higher chance of native-looking people might be able to obtain these roles in American media, but it's hard to tell.
It's definitely hard to tell. One thing I want to also say for the viewers is you're going to want to, you can change, you can definitely affect the changes that are to come, because I'm already doing this whenever it comes to government documentation, comes to the census, it comes to anything. I say American Indian, that's my race. I don't put Hispanic, I don't put Latino, any of that. If you start making this transition, and then also in your life, you're like, you tell people, hey, I'm American Indian, I'm not actually Hispanic, and here's why. It will change things. It's a numbers game. The more people that do it, the more the perception is going to change. Shoot, if one of you become famous as an actor, become famous in some other position, and people think you're Hispanic, and you come out, you're like, no, I'm not Hispanic, I'm American Indian for this reason. I mean, that right there already gets enough coverage from the media. Like it just keeps snowballing, but you have to get the ball rolling. So if we never do that, it will never happen.
Watch for like one famous Hispanic actress who will realize that maybe they should identify as Native, and watch everyone's heads like come off, like
Yeah.
the world's head. They'll be like, what? And that's the process that will take place in order for us to see that in reality, most Hispanics are Native in mostly Native countries. Again, Natives were forced to take Spanish surnames. They were forced into this mestizo, white created mestizo population to get these benefits. Rather, if that's for and many, married into whiter looking families as well, were forced to. So we have to remember that not all Hispanics are, half, mostly Spanish or something. I think the problem with Americans, I think in general, with their thinking of the Latin American world, is that we're all we all have some connection with Spain, and we all have these characteristics of a Latin American or someone from Spain or Portugal, and that is not the case. We have millions of natives in Guatemala and southern Mexico that don't represent the sort of typical thinking that an American might think we are, because Latin American media pushes these white actresses and actors that exemplify Spanish mannerisms. So
exactly. One other little punch to people with the whole Hispanic thing is why are we the only people separated by a language that we speak as a time factor? I don't see Black people and white people being called Britannic because they speak English. So why is this applied to us? And I think I had somebody debate with me. They're like, well, Hispanic and Latino aren't misnomers because we fit the definition. And it's like, okay, If I mean, I fit the definition of a wetback. I fit the definition of a beaner. Does that mean that I'm going to use the word? No. Like, fitting the definition of a word doesn't mean you should that the word's valid and you should use the word. That's nonsense, dude. That's a stupid point. But
That's true.
yeah.
You know, just I think for the people watching this, when you finally realize that this colonial word is only continuing on the conquistadors and colonizers and Krillos' plan in eliminating your native identity, only then will we finally see the light and realize that we are native. Will we get fierce criticism? Yes.
Yep.
But we, especially from probably people that are native but identify as mestizo, but we have to learn to have these sort of constructive arguments and bring in to the light that we are native, and that this identity isn't helping anything. So then we can help more people, you know, bring more people forward, and and hopefully create a larger native population, and eventually start our plan and, you know, fighting back against these government problems that are affecting, you know, our natives across the world.
For sure, for sure. One other point I want to bring up, because I can already hear a rebuttal coming from some people, is, well, aren't you like hijacking or appropriating native culture? Aren't you disrespecting actual natives that live the real deal? You know, aren't you blah blah blah? That's not true. I'll give you two examples. So Professor Jack Forbes, again of Powhatan descent, registered here in the North. Passed away in 2011, said to be a mestizo was a cop-out. It was to be part of a racial grading system, and it's basically, in essence, you're saying you're nothing at all. He wanted us Southern natives to realize what we are, to accept our Indigenous identity, to reclaim that. And he saw us as long-lost brothers and sisters. He did not see us as something different. I have a personal colleague that I know. She is a registered Apache. She's 100% or whatever, you know. She's the whole package you criticizers like to require of everybody else. Well, she says that we're the same as her. We're not any different, and to be mestizo is also to be a cop out as well. So there you have it from the source. You know, some natives, yes, might disagree, and a lot of that is because, especially if they're those that might be in indigenous communities in Mexico, some of them might disagree because of bitterness, because of the oppression that mestizos have had a hand with Krillos in enforcing. But at the end of the day, if we realize that we're not separate from them, that will improve the situation, that will stop that oppression. And the quickest way to get there is to make people realize they are not different. So no, reclaim your Indigenous identity. You're not, you know, don't believe in any of these naysayers and saying that you're disrespecting this or appropriating that. That's nonsense. You can't appropriate something that is rightfully yours. You know, obviously don't go to a tribe that you have zero connection to that exists and say that you're a part of that tribe. Try to join the tribe and do it in a very respectful fashion. If the tribe doesn't exist, then you can claim that if you have good evidence, I would say, but do it also respectfully and make sure you get that evidence so that you can back it up. Because we can also bring back these tribes that have been destroyed. So yes, I just want to make those couple points, because I've seen this point brought up many, many times, and it's stupid too.
Mm-hmm. And remember, like we said earlier, when you identify as a mestizo in the Latin American world, as a Hispanic or as a Latino, more importantly, a mestizo, you're living on the conquistadors, Krillos, colonial Krillos' dream, and carrying on this colonial concept of following in their footsteps and doing their bidding, making yourself non-native, believing that you're superior to these native people that, you know, may be dressed differently than you,
Right,
a different
right.
language than you. We all
And
have to realize.
adding on to that point too, though, man, is people that enforce this, they're pro Casta enforcers, pro mestizo enforcers. You're part of the problem. you are part of, you're just enforcing old outdated Spanish standards. You're just a neo-Spanish enforcer, so you're part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So just wanted to add
And
that
if,
in.
thank you. And if you enforce this, why? I ask. Because if you support Native Americans, Native people in Latin America, why are you enforcing something that's colonial? Why are you enforcing something that is completely foreign to us still to this day? I look at these terms as foreign. They weren't designed to help us. The colonial system was designed to keep natives and people like us held back from Krillos. Again, look at the higher up people in Latin America. Look at the system that we're living in. It's quite backwards in some terms. It is backwards because we still have millions of us that are still suffering. And most importantly, it's right here. We're still thinking like we're back in the 1600s again, believing that Krillos can do no wrong, still voting them into office. I mean, we have the power. We're not, for my Native brothers and sisters that live in Latin America, in these mostly Native countries, we're not in the United States where we need, Caucasians to support our cause. If you're in Guatemala, if you're in Mexico, if you're in Nicaragua, you have the power to change things if you want to. If you want other people to get on board. And that's the thing, is persuading others to join this cause, identifying as Native and breaking away from this mestizo identity, because it's not doing us any good. Look at the centuries before, and then look at now. People are
Right.
still suffering, still corruption, violence, destruction, mass migration. And I think it's time now that we move on from that.
Certainly. One thing to wrap up is our backgrounds, at least to tell our viewers who we are and how we even got here, I guess.
Yeah, I'll go first. Unless you wanted to.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So, for me, I don't know how much time we have on this recording. I was born in Peru, and I lived there for about 6 months. And I was adopted, and I lived in the U.S. all my life. I never looked at myself as Native because I was taught that, being a Native, at least in the United States, it went back to like identifying as someone as living in a teepee or a hut. My knowledge of Native Americans in South and Central America was very little at the time when I was a kid and growing up. And then I realized that, looking at my skin complexion and others, and looking at like the social barriers that are put in place by the people up top that make the rules and the laws. And I realized that I'm not that much different from them, I do wish that, I knew more about, my ancestral tribes. And I'm working on that right now. But growing up in the US and being adopted, you don't think so much about your identity, at least for me, because I grew up in a very white, somewhat rural community. Only until college did I really, I think, see the light. And then after college, doing research and, watching a lot of videos from Russell Means, and now learning more about Dr. Forbes, about Native identity and culture, and just seeing the backward system that many of us are living in Central and South America, and realizing that there is power to change that. And what I want to see in the future is, us supporting each other, not breaking each other down because of this colonial system. again, this system was put in place to keep us separated, from our brothers and sisters who, dress differently than us. Maybe they speak a different language than us, but remember, we're the same. I mean, look at us and look at, them. And I know we'll get there. And I hope this podcast really opened up some eyes. You can take it from here, Juan.
All right. So I was born in Mexico, was brought here to the United States when I was 3 or 4. I grew up here in the South, here in Alabama. That's where the capital of the Confederacy was in the state. But growing up, it was a little rough because when I got to around 10 years old and beyond, to the end of high school, I encountered a lot of racism, a lot of where's your green card, getting looked at like I was some brown savage. I grew up hating the color of my skin. I wished I was white. A lot of the times I would put that down. Well, I didn't know any better either, but I would put that down as my race on all these government forms. Remember the whole Latino and Hispanic thing, how I was treated, even though it's saying I'm actually tied to Rome and tied to Spain, which is nonsense. So just growing up like that, getting called taco, getting called beaner, getting called wetback, illegal, it made me hate being Mexican. I completely rejected it too. Like I remember I would have family come from Mexico and I would say, hey, no, I'm American. I'm not Mexican. And we'd get into arguments all the time. Same thing with my parents, get in arguments all the time because I would reject it and say, no, I'm not Mexican. But that was because of people just making fun of me. Like I remember I had friends that or supposed friends or just acquaintances that would say, oh, you're Mexican. And they would point at me and they would start laughing like it was some huge joke. And I'm like, why are you laughing at the fact that I'm a Mexican? Like, what's so funny? So yeah, it really caused me to hate what I was for the longest. And eventually, as I succeeded in life, that started to go away. And then, funnily enough, it wasn't like some major event that caused me to realize I was Native. It was more like I'd always puzzled about it, and people had said, oh, no, you can't possibly be Native. I think one time I said in high school, maybe I'm 50% Aztec or something. People thought that was ludicrous because they're like, well, they all died, But I realized it because I took a DNA test because I wanted to see what I was, and then I saw that I was more Native than anything else, and that's what led me to this path here. As I started thinking about it, running into arguments, and the arguments weren't convincing. Like the whole mestizaje and all that other crap wasn't convincing to me. I thought that was stupid, even before I was like decolonized or whatever. And then it just led me here. It was those DNA tests, I guess, that because I thought I would get like a really high white percentage. I don't know what I was thinking, but maybe again that probably goes back to the self-loathing I had for a while, and then because of all the racism. But now things have come full circle where I'm proud of what I am. I'm not ashamed of being brown, and I think everybody should never be ashamed of that. And that's why I want people to, with pride, reclaim what they really are. I think that's a really important thing. But that is my story. And I thank you guys for watching this podcast. Hopefully it's a really good one for you guys. Sorry it's been long because we had a lot to talk about.
We did.
We'll probably make some more. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. So
yeah,
we'll see you guys the next time.
Stay tuned. Goodbye.